What is poppin' YouTube? Bringing you 10 wide receivers you must avoid that no one is talking about right now. Starting off with player number 1, and it's going to be Jaylen Waddle. And this is going to upset my friend Notorious Fantasy because he's the biggest Dolphins fan. But right now, I just do not like Jaylen Waddle's value right now in redraft and best ball leagues. When we're talking about Jaylen Waddle as wide receiver 15 off the board, overall player 20. So you're having to select Jaylen Waddle in the back half of your second round. And I understand Jaylen Waddle in these best ball formats, when you have to have that 3 wide receivers, you definitely want some elite level studs. And I understand Jaylen Waddle, he's a higher end wide receiver 2, but selecting a higher end wide receiver 2 at the back half of the second round, we're talking about Jaylen Waddle when we were talking a few years ago, when in 2021 he had that wide receiver 15 points per game finish. Then in 2022 he had the wide receiver 12 points per game finish. We were super ecstatic and hyped. So you're going to say to me, well, Caleb, he's finished in the top 21 fantasy football wide receivers on a points per game basis the last 3 years. Why are you concerned? That seems like a pretty good floor. The reason that I am concerned, because when I am sitting here in the second round, I am not looking for a wide receiver that's going to just be okay. That's just going to provide a really great floor option with not a high floor. And I just do not think Jaylen Waddle has that type of upside, that type of ceiling. I mean, last year when we're looking at him, his highest game was in week 15 where he had 28.2 fantasy points. He was the wide receiver 2 that week. But other than that, my man was pretty much sitting around 16 to 17 points if he had a really great game, and a little bit lower than that if he had a bad game. And when we're looking the second highest, 25.1 fantasy points per game day. So he had 2 like mid to high 20 games. But other than that, it was pretty mediocre here for Jaylen Waddle. Now, I know the consistency was there, but it wasn't a high level consistency. Wide receiver 31 on targets, wide receiver 24 on target share, wide receiver 10 on target rate. For me, we still have Tyreek Hill in this offense. We got some good running backs in the backfield with A-Chain, with Mostert, with right now added in. They add OBJ. I'm not saying OBJ is going to take away targets from Jaylen Waddle. I am just very concerned about Jaylen Waddle, and I just think you must avoid him. And I am not drafting him if he is there on the clock for me. My second player that I think you need to avoid is Stefon Diggs. Stefon Diggs is coming off the board as wide receiver 22, overall player 30, and I hear you. He gets added to CJ Stroud, which is not that big of a down tier from Josh Allen in the overall quarterback rankings. But when we're talking about Stefon Diggs, now all of a sudden he goes into an offense that has Tank Dell and Nico Collins. And Nico Collins just got that big contract extension. And so Stefon Diggs is pretty much on a 1-year prove-it deal. I don't think he's going to be re-signing with the Houston Texans, but that doesn't really matter because last year you're going to say to me, well, Caleb, he was wide receiver 13 on a points per game basis with only 16.1 fantasy points per game. It really wasn't that bad. Well, the first 9 weeks, it was great. The first 9 weeks with Stefon Diggs, absolutely incredible. But then we kind of go from like week 10 to week 17. My man only had double-digit fantasy points 1 time. So if we're looking at Stefon Diggs, all of a sudden we're going to be saying, well, he kind of had second half of the season fluke. Are we going to base that on that being a fluke, or are we going to base that on the fact that Stefon Diggs is now 30 years old? These wide receivers, they do end up aging pretty quick right in front of our eyes, and that happened last year. Now you can kind of adjust that to the fact that they had a new offensive coordinator come in. Maybe defenses were targeting Stefon Diggs a little bit differently, forcing the ball into Dalton Kincaid, James Cook's hands. I don't care, because at the same time, he's now entering an offense where he's not necessarily going to be the number 1 focal point, bona fide alpha level wide receiver. So I'm avoiding Stefon Diggs as my second wide receiver. My third wide receiver that you must avoid, that no one's really talking about, is going to be Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen gets traded from the Chargers to the Bears, and it gets exciting because you're like the Bears fans. You're like, oh my gosh, we got Rome Odunze, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and our quarterback savior in Caleb Williams. That's a lot of mouths to feed. And Keenan Allen's currently going off the board as wide receiver 33, overall player 53. And we're looking at Keenan Allen. Okay, last 2 seasons, 10 games played in 2022, 13 games played in 2023. Now, in 2023, the points per game was absolutely incredible. Wide receiver 3, 21.5 fantasy points per game, 11.5 yards per reception, 150 targets, 108 receptions. So you're saying to me, oh my gosh, just put him in that same offense with the Chicago Bears. Boom, bada boom. Now, Keenan Allen, predominantly last year, Mike Williams got hurt. He was the alpha level only target that Justin Herbert had in that offense. Now he goes to a place where not only do you have DJ Moore, who is coming off a career year, you have a top 10 wide receiver drafted in Rome Odunze. You also got Cole Kmet, who's a very good tight end, and they addressed the running back position with DeAndre Swift. Can Keenan Allen get 150 targets this next season? I do not think so. Can Keenan Allen even get DJ Moore's targets that he had last season, where we're talking about him in that 120 range? I think that might even be a little bit high. I think Keenan Allen might be in for like 110 targets this year. And if that's going to be the case, he's going to have to be either uber efficient, have a ton of touchdowns, or play in more than 13 games. You just haven't seen that from from Keenan Allen. It makes me a little bit worried about Keenan Allen. That is currently why I am not drafting him anywhere right now. My fourth player is going to be Xavier Worthy, and you must be avoiding Xavier Worthy right now, ladies and gentlemen. And the reason is I think he's super talented. Right now on Underdog, wide receiver 36, 60th off the board in ADP. Xavier Worthy's competing with Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce and Hollywood Brown. Now, I hear you. You're going to be saying this offense is going to look great for Patrick Mahomes because all of a sudden you got two burners on Xavier Worthy and Hollywood Brown on the outside. What is that target share going to be like? Because we saw Rashee Rice absolutely emerge as a dominant level wide receiver when he's not out there speeding in the real world. You got Travis Kelce, who's also a very dominant player. Where are we looking at with Xavier Worthy? Where's the overall upside? Because in the same range of guys, we got Chris Godwin, Calvin Ridley, Jaden Reed, who we know are a little bit more for sure things than a guy like Xavier Worthy. Now, I did say when I was talking about Jaylen Waddle, we're chasing for absolute upside. So I agree. This is a home run hit if Xavier Worthy turns into Tyreek Hill. I just personally do not believe that Xavier Worthy is going to be able to do that from the jump. I could eat my words on this because my man is extremely fast. But Xavier Worthy, I do feel like is very overvalued right now on the Underdog streets. My next guy is also a wide receiver that's a rookie. It's going to be Keon Coleman. Keon Coleman steps in, and everyone's kind of projecting him as the alpha for this Buffalo Bills offense because not only did we see Stefon Diggs leave, they didn't really bring in anybody else besides Curtis Samuel. So you got Curtis Samuel, Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakir, and you're saying to myself, someone's got to catch the freaking ball in this offense. They're going to have to move. I mean, Josh Allen, he's not a bad quarterback. Someone's going to have to emerge. Now, I'm going to put some of these quotes here. All this coach speak from their coaching staff really has been saying that Keon Coleman, yes, he's an absolute monster on the field, but he's still got a lot to learn with this playbook, a lot to learn with their schemes, which really, to me, really screams that Keon Coleman isn't going to be the wide receiver one or starting for the Buffalo Bills in week one. And when we're talking about Keon Coleman in the same range, we're talking about guys like Ladd McConkey, DeAndre Hopkins, Brian Thomas, Deontay Johnson, even Jordan Addison's a few spots ahead. A lot of those guys' situation, Brian Thomas is also a rookie, so is Ladd, but Ladd's going to be getting the targets. Keon Coleman makes me just a little bit nervous because he wasn't necessarily a target hog. He was a wide receiver that won down the field. Now, we absolutely love the TikTok videos. I'm just a little bit nervous about Keon Coleman. Have him as a wide receiver that I'm currently avoiding right now in drafts until his price ends up coming down. We then move to our next guy, and it's going to be Christian Watson. And Christian Watson is going off the board as wide receiver 45, overall pick 76. And I'll say this about Christian Watson. He has a lot of potential. I mean, when we're looking at him, rookie season had 11.7 fantasy points per game, was the wide receiver 32. Last year, in only the 9 games that he played, 11.3 fantasy points per game was the wide receiver 41. And my biggest concern with Christian Watson is we're drafting him. It feels like you would say maybe at his floor with wide receiver 45, but there's not a lot of upside. And the thing that a lot of people are not considering is these wide receivers for the Green Bay Packers. Not only do we have Jaden Reed, not only do we have Romeo Doubs, not only do we have Bo Melton, not only do we have Luke Musgrave, Tucker Kraft, Jaden Reed, there's a lot of guys that I am just worried about in this Green Bay Packers offense. And so I just think there's a lot of mouths to feed on top of the fact that Christian Watson has been predominantly hurt with those hamstrings the last 2 years. So all of a sudden I know he's going to doctors trying to figure out whether it's a hydration, whether it's a training issue, but there's just so many mouths to feed right now in this offense that I am a little bit concerned about this overall value for Christian Watson, and I'm typically going another different direction when I am drafting. Next guy we're going to be talking about is Khalil Shakir. Khalil Shakir, same way that we're talking about Keon Coleman, makes me a little bit worried about the Buffalo Bills because he's getting the Buffalo Bills bump. I like Curtis Samuel. I put him out in my video yesterday, but Khalil Shakir is just a guy right now that's going off the board as wide receiver 54, overall player 107 on Underdog. And listen, I understand you need these wide receivers in the Underdog format, so you might as well just take a shot on Khalil Shakir because we have seen those little bits of life from him. But let's not forget, this is going to be his third season. Really hasn't done anything. He had like one spike week last year. When we're talking about him, wide receiver 68 on a points per game basis this last year. And when we're looking at his overall game log, of course, he had that huge game where he had 20 fantasy points in week 11 versus the Jets. Had in week 18 had 16, 12, and then 17. So he really started to come on in the back of the season. I think Khalil Shakir, when he actually has defenses on him that are focused on him because he's like the clear wide receiver 2, I just don't like this price. And I could definitely come to regret this, but I'm definitely avoiding Khalil Shakir when there's guys around him like a Rashid Shaheed, like a Romeo Doubs, like a Josh Palmer, who are a little bit more volume centric than a guy like Khalil Shakir. So definitely avoiding Khalil Shakir. Next guy we're talking about, Mike Williams. And Mike Williams signs with the New York Jets. And of course, last year ending with that injury, and all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, you can talk yourself into Aaron Rodgers, Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall. Like, this offense should be better. Wide receiver 56, overall player 114. Mike Williams is the ultimate boom bust guy. When we're talking about Gabe Davis, Mike Williams laid the groundwork first. So I understand that, but 16.7 fantasy points per game in the 3 games that he played last year. What is that recovery going to be looking like for Mike Williams? How healthy is Mike Williams going to be? Those are kind of my biggest concerns with Mike Williams. Why am I'm avoiding him right now in Underdog leagues? And like I said, we're going to give really really quick with these next two guys. We got Quentin Johnston and Rashod Bateman. And when we're talking about Quentin Johnston, a lot of people are projecting him. Oh my goodness, there's no other wide receivers in the Chargers offense. This means Quentin Johnston's actually going to have this year 2 breakout. Wide receiver 84 on a points per game basis last year. In the 17 games played, only 67 targets, 5.5 fantasy points per game. I can show you this opportunity chart right here. I can show you this other opportunity chart right here. What does this scream? It screams that not a lot of the metrics point to Quentin Johnston being a good wide receiver. I know he's working out Marvin Harrison Jr. this offseason, but for me, Quentin Johnston's a guy I'm staying away from in the range that you're having to draft him when we're talking about him in the same range as a guy like Jalen Polk, Ricky Pearsall, Jeremy Burton. I mean, he's alongside some of these rookies that have upside that didn't get the same draft capital, but like ahead of a guy like Darnell Mooney. Like Darnell Mooney is going to be the clear wide receiver 2 on an offense that's going to have either Kirk Cousins or Michael Penix throwing him the ball. I understand Justin Herbert is an elite level quarterback. Someone has to catch the ball. Same argument that's being made for these Buffalo Bills pass catchers. I just cannot get on board with that. And then my final guy is going to be Rashod Bateman. And Rashod Bateman right now is going off the board as wide receiver 73, overall player 161. And Rashod Bateman's going in the same range. It's guys like Malachi Corley, Wan'Dale Robinson, Troy Franklin, Adam Thielen. Like I prefer all those guys over Rashod Bateman. And I understand you're probably like, Rashod Bateman can be that wide receiver 2. They re-sign him. The Baltimore Ravens have to have hope. I mean, how many years do we have to give these guys before they finally break out? I mean, we're going into year 4 of Rashod Bateman. The breakout hasn't happened by now, unless it's Corey Davis. I understand Corey Davis had hype. It ended up happening in year 5. I just am not projecting that for Rashod Bateman. I think he's totally overvalued right now. There's some guys around him that I actually prefer. Even like a guy like a Marvin Mims, who was a faceplant wide receiver in his rookie season. A guy like Michael Wilson, who's going to be the wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, depending on how you view Zay Jones in that Arizona Cardinals offense. These are some guys that I'm avoiding right now in my underdog and redraft draft. So hit that like and subscribe button if you like redraft fantasy football. More content on the way this week. More content on the way all season. I'm super hyped. Want you guys here in this community. So leave me a comment, drop a like if you haven't already, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.